The Freddy Files released in 2017. It served as a guidebook to the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise up to the release of Sister Location. But did you know this book actually had 3 scrapped versions that can still be seen in the book? It's true. Scott Cawthon made a post in 2017, a few days after the release of the Freddy Files, that talked about this. There's actually an interesting answer to the question of who, exactly, was making the portions in the red and marking notes in the Freddy Files. In the beginning, there was an idea that the book should be from the perspective of an in-universe investigator, trying to solve the murders from FNaF 1. However, that scope seemed too limited, and wouldn't have been able to discuss gameplay strategies, since it was an in-game character. Then it was changed so that the perspective would be from an out-of-universe member of the FNaF community, trying to piece together the puzzle, but would have ultimately been disappointing since the book wasn't designed to solve everything. So then it was changed to be an in-universe online blogger trying to solve the mystery, but who had an alternate agenda and was trying to mislead the reader. However, this was effectively creating an in-universe character and adding to the lore, which I didn't want to do. So the identity of the author changed many times, and the underlines and red markings are remnants of those previous characters. 2 in-universe and 1 out. 1 on a mission to solve the murders, 1 on the trail to solve the game, and 1 on a trail to deliberately mislead you. This is very interesting, as it means this book is some sort of amalgamation of 3 different concepts. So you might be wondering, why are you making this a full video? Sure, this is interesting, but wouldn't it better serve as a YouTube short? Well, here's why I made the video. I believe the in-universe investigator from the first version of the book may have been none other than the franchise's main protagonist, Michael Afton, and here's why. Scott said for the first version of the book, it would be from the POV of an in-game character. But for the third version of the book, with the in-universe blogger, Scott said he would be creating an in-universe character, and he would be adding to the lore, which he didn't want to do. The wording of this implies to me that the original version's protagonist would have been a character we already know about. And since this was around the time of Sister Location, there's only really 4 characters that existed at this time. That could be the investigator. William, Mike, Jeremy, and Fritz. Jeremy and Fritz worked at the FNaF 2 location. I doubt William would give a shit, so that leaves Mike. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Not only would he literally be an in-game character since he was solving the FNaF 1 murders, which I'm assuming is the missing night guards, so he would be in FNaF 1, which is the book is based on. But what's a better way to figure out what's going on with missing night guards than to become one yourself? And I know what you're thinking. Isn't that extremely dangerous and reckless? Well, yeah, but as Hanut says in Sister Location, Michael has a disregard for self-preservation. Further evidence is in the book itself. There are multiple red pen edits. And which character in the series is known for his red pen edits? Mike. He used red pens in the logbook, which came out a little under 4 months after the Freddy Files released, which means the books were probably in development at the same time. And we know the remnants of the former version of the book can still be seen in the official version. And look at these 2 drawings. One Mike draws in the logbook and then Mathman from the Freddy Files. Don't they look pretty similar? Also, some of this stuff definitely seems like stuff Mike would probably say. So you might be thinking, okay, this is cool and all, but why does it matter? Well, it could give Mike a motive to work at FNaF 1. He was trying to figure out what was going on with the missing night guards. But why would Mike want to investigate this? I hear you asking telepathically. That's a good question. I wonder if there's an event in Mike's life that he feels guilty over and would want to try and redeem himself for. Okay, this is cool and all, but assuming I'm right, is this plotline still canon? Well, I don't know. Technically, it is released content since this version of the Freddy Files can still be seen in book, but nothing since has implied that Mike worked at FNaF 1 to solve murders. But then again, nothing really says he didn't either. I guess there's that quote in the logbook where he says he worked at Freddy's for free pizza, but I doubt Mike would say, I worked at this place to solve the mystery of the missing night guards. So, I don't know. Let's just play around with the idea for a little bit. If Mike is working at FNaF 1 due to trying to solve the murders, what does that change? Not really much outside FNaF 1 itself, but if you do believe Mike is Fritz Smith or Jimmy Fitzgerald, it could explain why he was working at FNaF 2. He's trying to solve the DCI, and he uses the name of Afton's victims to cover. Maybe Mike Schmidt is the name of a DCI victim, who knows? This can play into the Immortal and the Restless as well. Mike relates to Clara, so she most likely represents Mike in some way. And Vlad is most likely William or Fazbear Entertainment. Could the baby be the missing night guards, or just the murders in general? Anyways, I want to talk about this potential original version of the Freddy Files because I thought it was interesting. I will admit, Scott saying he wouldn't be able to discuss gameplay strategies is a bit odd if Mike was the protagonist of the book. Since he worked at FNaF 1 and he would have to survive the night, he could talk about his strategy to survive. But maybe it would have been weird for Mike to go in depth about like the AI and stuff. I'll talk about the other 2 versions a bit as well. There isn't much for me to talk about, except that the out-of-universe fan is probably going to be gaming journalist W.A. Ralston, who we know exists because of an old version of the Freddy Files cover where he's a gaming journalist, so it's probably the second out-of-universe author. And this is almost definitely a William Afton reference. I mean, W.A. really? The online blogger, I don't know what to really talk about here, except that there was probably some Fazbear Entertainment shit with how the blogger was going to mislead the reader. The old versions of the Freddy Files are pretty interesting, and I don't see anyone talking about them, mostly because most people don't know they exist. Can these old versions be used for lore? Probably not, but it is technically released content, so who knows? Something I do know is that you should subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to hit 2,500 subscribers before the end of April. So come on, help me out. Also, make sure to comment letting me know which version of the Freddy Files would you like to have seen released. The Investigator, the Fan, or the Blogger. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye. Ever since Five Nights at Freddy's 3 came out in 2015, there's been a debate about who the guard in this game is, especially since in every other game we either learn the protagonist's name or we get hints to who they are. FNaF 3 is the odd one out. Well, I guess there's FNaF AR too, but who cares about FNaF AR? The suspects at the time were Mike Schmidt, Jeremy Fitzgerald, Fritz Smith, or just some random guy. However, over the years, the list of suspects has lengthened. I've already made a video about who the protagonist is before, but I feel like I have to remake it because it just could be better, and there's more I have to add. This is a mystery I care a lot about because FNaF 3 is in my top 3 games of the series. There are 2 candidates and new evidence I want to talk about. Before we get into all that, let's talk about all the things we know about the Fright Guard. Number 1, they have worked at the location for at least one night prior to the game's events.
Hey, glad you came back for another night. I promise it'll be a lot more interesting this time.
Now, it should be noted this is most likely a meta line for the player, Scott thanking us for coming back to play another game, but still it does show that unlike every other guard within the series, Night 1 isn't the first night on the job for our character. Number 2, they seem to survive the fire at the end of the game. Yeah, that's it. We don't know anything about this guy. Before we talk about who the guard can be, let's talk about who can't be the guard. Jeremy Fitzgerald. At the time, Jeremy was, well, I guess he'd be 4th. Not that popular. Decently popular, I don't know. But now we know he just can't be the guard. It's implied in FNaF 2 already that Jeremy is the victim of the bite of 87, and it's even more implied in the week before, where Ralph types in the numbers 1987 in the phone and hears his phone call to Jeremy about getting moved to the day shift. Since the previous code, 1983, was about the bite of 83, it's reasonable to assume this is about the bite of 87, connecting Jeremy to the event. I mean, he already was, but still. And with all the other foreshadowing in FNaF 2, it seems strongly implied that Jeremy is the bite victim. We also learned the week before that the victim can't do much of anything. This would include being a night guard at a horror attraction 30 years later. Some people think that Ralph just doesn't have all the information and Jeremy's just fine, but I find that very unlikely because it requires the story to just lie to us. It was a better explanation when we could argue Ralph didn't know anything just from the FNaF 1 phone call, but since in the week before we learned the press focused on the bite and that the victim was never able to tell anyone what happened, I think it's pretty likely Jeremy did lose his frontal lobe and can't do anything. So yeah, Jeremy isn't the guard. But if you think Jeremy isn't the bite of 87 victim, just use the Fritz Smith evidence. You know, they're basically the same guy anyway. I know they're not the same guy, by the way. They have the same evidence, basically. With who it can't be out of the way, let's talk about who it can be. There are the 5 I talked about last time. Michael Afton, main protagonist of 1, 4, Sister Location, FNaF 6. Hudson Foster, protagonist of the Fazbear's Fright story What We Found, which is heavily inspired by FNaF 3. Henry Emily, setman from FNaF 6. Cassie's dad, protagonist of Help Want 2, and Sammy Emily, Henry's son from the novels. There are 2 new candidates I want to add to the table. Fritz Smith, the secondary protagonist of FNaF 2, being playable on Custom Night, and William Afton himself, the main antagonist of the franchise, which I know sounds crazy, but just wait for it. Some people also think it could be a nameless random person, but at that point you might as well believe it's Hudson. This video is going to be a long one, so get a drink, a snack, and relax, because this is going to be my most definitive video on the Five Nights at Freddy's 3 Night Guard, and probably the most definitive video on YouTube, if we're being honest. However, before we get to the suspects, we have to talk about the Phantoms. A lot of people use the Phantoms as evidence for the Fright Guard's identity. I even use them as the smoking gun in my original video. However, over time I've come to realize that they don't really matter for the guard's identity. In what we found, we learned that the Phantoms are hallucinations that seem to be caused by Afton's presence within Fazbear's Fright, based on the guard's past trauma, but also seem to be based on the props in the attraction. It probably have something to do with the agony in the location since the Phantoms don't reappear in FNaF 6. Now, that's not the main thing with the Phantoms. The main point for the guard's identity is Withered Freddy and Foxy, since those guys aren't props in the attraction. People take this to mean the guard must have seen Withered Freddy and Foxy. However, the Phantoms being based on the Withereds can be easily explained. Phantom Freddy can be explained by the Shadow Freddy Easter egg in The Office, and Withered Foxy can be explained by Withered Foxy's hook in the FNaF 3 Office. It's also possible that the guard just knows what the withered animatronics look like, since the Fright crew likely would have done research into what the animatronics looked like during FNaF 2 and would have found pictures or something. Pictures the guards could have seen. Or maybe again it's something to do with agony, I don't know. Or maybe the withered designs do not matter and Scott just uses the classics and withereds interchangeably. Although I do think they probably did look different in universe. My point is, the Phantoms don't really matter that much for the guard's identity. For certain characters, I do think we could argue that them being there and so prominent is evidence, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. With that, let's get into our first candidate. Sammy is a very unpopular theory for the Fright Guard. He even got removed from that huge FNaF theory tier list. His is a unique one because unlike all the other suspects, there is no evidence for Sammy being the guard. It's a headcanon. It's a cool headcanon, but it's a headcanon nonetheless, so yeah, just throw him out. It's definitely not him. Fritz Smith is the next person I want to talk about, assuming he isn't Michael Afton, of course, which I don't believe he is, as I explained in a previous video. Although, something I didn't bring up in that video is that another reason I don't think Mike is Fritz anymore is because of Scott's rule of clarification. Scott likes to clarify things in the next game. Once the theory of Mike being Fritz became extremely popular, he showed in the next game that one of the missing kids was named Fritz, implying that the guard and kid are related. This wouldn't be bad if Jeremy's name wasn't reused too. This means there are two options. Jeremy and Fritz are the parents of the MCI victims, or related to them in some way, or Mike is both Jeremy and Fritz, and he is using the names of Williams' victims. Mike Schmidt could be the name of a DCI victim, I guess. This idea was called out in the Ultimate Guide, interestingly enough, and what's even more interesting is that it was one of the new pages for the book. It wasn't in the other versions of it. Mike being Jeremy is unlikely because, again, the week before implies Jeremy is the Bite 87 victim. And I've gone attached to my Jeremy narrative that I explained in this video. Now, if the movie comes out and Mike, for any reason, used the name Fritz, and Jeremy doesn't show up at all, then yeah, I would probably believe Mike is Jeremy and Fritz. But right now, well, the movie's not out, so yeah. My point is that the graves seem to be Scott clarifying Jeremy and Fritz are the parents of the MCI. Anyway, let's get back to Fritz being the FNaF 3 guard. The evidence for Fritz being the guard is that at the end of the game, the protagonist is never named, perhaps implying they are someone from the past and we have to figure out who they are. And all the phantoms, with the exception of Chica, are either characters introduced in FNaF 2 or based on their appearance in FNaF 2. And FNaF 3 in general seems to have a strange focus on FNaF 2, which I already explained in a previous video, so I'll just play the clip here. Also, FNaF 3 has a strange focus on FNaF 2. The office has a box filled with the toy animatronics and withered Foxy's hook. In 5 out of 6 of the Happiest Day minigames, when plays a character introduced in FNaF 2, the paper pals from FNaF 2 can show up as Easter eggs in the office, but to be fair, so can the FNaF 1 cupcake. And furthermore, all the phantoms except for Chica are based on FNaF 2. It also makes sense for Fritz's hallucinations to be animatronics coming to his office to jumpscare him, since that's what happened to him in FNaF 2, and it was most likely a traumatic experience. I'm gonna be honest, if FNaF 3 was the end of the series, I would probably think Fritz is the guard. However, since the series did not end at 3, I think we can say he is not the guard. Nothing has pointed towards him being the guard since its release, and the phantoms being based off FNaF 2 doesn't matter that much, like I said. The point about the animatronics being based on his trauma from FNaF 2 is pretty decent though. You know, can't really argue with that. That's what I was talking about earlier where I said the phantoms can be used as minor evidence for some character. There's just more evidence for other characters.
I seem to be trapped inside the Springlock suit.
William being the guard is a theory proposed by the channel, I don't know how to say their name. It's an hour-long video which goes deep into the theory. The basic summary though, and this is definitely not the most in-depth, the idea is that Hudson is a William parallel, and that FNaF 3 happens in William's mind. I can't go too in-depth because I don't want to break down an hour-long video, and you guys should watch it. It is a good video. Some of the evidence I can talk about is that the FNaF 3 teasers say it's all in your mind. There's also the FNaF 3 trailer, where the camera zooms in onto Springtrap's eye, maybe implying that we are going to see things from his POV. Night 6 is also called Nightmare, but Scott has always called Night 6 Nightmare, so yeah. I think it's a fine theory, I just don't think it's what Scott's going for. I suppose the end of what we found could point towards this, as it's implied Springtrap never moves, meaning the night's events were in Hudson's head, but that's it. I just don't think this is what Scott's going for. The All in Your Mind teaser is probably talking about the Phantoms, not the entire game, and the trailer going into Springtrap's eye could just be a cool transition. But watch the video and come to your own conclusion. Henry Emily has been a pretty decently popular theory for the guard's identity since FNaF 6, where he was properly introduced. There was even a point where he and Mike were the only real suspects. Oh, how I wish we could go back to those days. Does this theory hold up though? Yeah, it's pretty good. The evidence is that in FNaF 6, Henry recounts the Follow Me minigames, even knowing Afton set a trap.
He lured them all back to a familiar place, back with familiar tricks. He set some kind of trap. I don't know what it was, but he led them there, again. He overpowered them, again. And he robbed them of the only thing that they had, again.
It's possible that Guard dreams the Follow Me minigames between nights, or somehow has visions of them, so Henry may be recounting his dreams while he worked at Fazbear's Fright. Speaking of the minigames, the Guard may help set up the Happiest Day minigames by playing the arcade games, and Return to the Pit seems to kind of imply that Happiest Day is played on arcade, since Oswald, when he goes back in time, you know, does that. Although it is a different thing, but like, it still is Happiest Day, but Who knows? If this is true, they are trying to help free the souls, and that was Henry's primary motivation in FNaF 6. Further evidence is that the Silver Eyes was written during FNaF 3's development, so it's possible Scott always intended Henry to be the guard and kept the name secret so he could figure out Henry was the guard when the Silver Eyes came out. It's also possible the guard burnt the place down, and as we know, Henry's plan in FNaF 6 was to burn down the pizzeria with everyone inside. It's possible that FNaF 3 was Henry's first attempt at that plan, and he refined it for FNaF 6, since in FNaF 6 they can't leave, there's no way for William to escape this time. And in FNaF 6, you lure the animatronics away using audio, much like in FNaF 3. It's possible Henry got this idea from working at Fazbear's Fright. Henry being the guard can make sense too. Henry may have wanted to keep up with recent Fazbear locations, even if they aren't official, where he felt a calling to work as a location. As we know from Fazbear's Fright's The Book series, it's possible that characters can feel a calling to go to Freddy's due to something called the 0 point field. For example, Greg, the protagonist of the story Fetch, feels a calling to Freddy's. This may be true for Fazbear's Fright, the location too. Something could be calling Henry, not exactly sure what though. With all the evidence for the theory out of the way, we can see it's actually a pretty decent theory. However, almost all the evidence has alternative explanations. As for Follow Me, not only is it not confirmed that the guard has dreams of the minigame, but it's also possible that William documented the minigame's events, and Henry later read these documents. We know Henry has access to William's files, so it's not that much of a reach. As for the guard saying Happiest Day, that is not confirmed, although again, Return of the Pit, I don't know what to believe anymore. And it seems more likely that BV is setting up the Happiest Day, although I have a problem with this, as we know the minigames do exist in the universe, which seems unnecessary to add if someone in the real world didn't help out in some way, but that's a video for another day. If the guard does play the minigames, it's a solid piece of evidence for Henry. As for the Silver Eyes point, while it's possible, if Scott wanted us to connect the two characters, you think he wouldn't have made Henry kill himself, and it also would have implied that he was the guard at some point, or just a guard in general. He never was. But then again, the Silver Eyes is an alternate universe. However, he did say not to use it for the games. As for the audio lures, this may just be for gameplay purposes, and Scott didn't think that much about it. It should also be noted that the lures in FNaF 6 are different. In FNaF 3, there's simply BB's voice lines played in the attraction, while in FNaF 6, they mimic a real human. Also, depending on when FNaF 3 and 6 take place, it's impossible for Henry to be the guard. He has to have spent time setting up FNaF 6. If FNaF 3 and 6 take place in the same year anyway, Henry would be too busy with his plan to work as the guard. As for the fire, it's pretty solid, until we remember this line in UCN.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here, no matter how many times they burn us.
Notice how the vengeful spirit, speaking through Orville, says no matter how many times they burn us, implying more than one person, meaning that whoever set the Fazbear's Fright fire and Henry are different people. Hey guys, I just need to come in here real quick and say I don't actually believe this anymore. I think it's possible that that is implying that multiple people burned them, but you could argue that they're just saying they as a collective, as people in general. No matter how many times they get burnt in general, they're never going to let go of Avon, right? I still want to include in the video, and I didn't really want to re-edit the entire audio, so I'll just come in here and say no, probably isn't what I said. I still do think the guard did burn it down though, because I feel like it's obvious the guard burned it down, sorry. I know Phone Guy said oh, faulty wiring, but then at the end of the game they do mention foul play. And I feel like it's obviously supposed to apply to us that it was more than faulty wiring. I still think it was faulty wiring. I think the guard used the faulty wiring to cause, or whoever it was, used the faulty wiring to burn the place down. I just feel like it's so obvious, especially since we gotta remember FNaF 3 was the end of the franchise at the time. Feels weird to have the ending be something that could just happen due to random chance. Which, obviously doesn't mean that's not what happened. I just feel like, it's obviously more than just faulty wiring. Someone definitely burned it down with intention. I still don't think the guard is Henry, though. Let's get back to the actual video. Before we get into the, in my opinion, most likely candidates, I just have one thing to ask of you guys, and that is that you subscribe. I know that 92% of you aren't, and it would help me out a ton. And if you've made it this far, you are clearly enjoying the video. Or maybe you're just hate watching, I don't know. Either way, subscribe, and let's get back to the video. Cassie's dad is the newest FNaF 3 guard candidate introduced in Ruin, although the idea spawned with the release of Help 1 and 2. I remember when the game first released, this theory was decently popular. I know a few people believed it, but it seems to have fallen off recently, which sucks because it is a good theory. The evidence is that Cassie's dad's Faz Watch has the code 395248, the same code used in FNaF 3 to get the Stage 01 minigame. Furthermore, Help 1 and 2 seems to parallel FNaF 3's Happiest Day minigames. The player has to unlock the memory dolls by not only playing minigames, but also doing more than what the minigame tells you to do. You figure this out using cryptic clues hidden throughout the game, game. These dolls also have the mask of the children, much like they did in Happiest Day after giving Golden Freddy the cake. Dolls are also replaced with cake if you repeat the steps to get them. Hell, to unlock one of them, you must unlock a secret Phaser Blast level based on FNaF 3, where you go one-on-one against Springtrap, although I guess Plush Baby is there too. Before this, Cassie's dad also set Phaser Blast on fire, which could be a connection to the FNaF 3 fire. The game also has two endings, a good and a bad, and both seem to be canon in some way, much like FNaF 3, where the both endings seem to happen. Okay, well, I guess Help 1-2's endings aren't really good. There is no good ending, but still, there's a happier ending. The reason I bring this up is because Cassie's dad may be the arcade conspiracist. The whole thing with that guy was playing the Princess Quest arcades to free Vanessa's consciousness or whatever he wanted to do, we're not really sure, although this theory is not confirmed. Another piece of evidence is that the Fazbear's Fright newspaper says that Fazbear's Fright will bring back your childhood in the worst way possible. This line may actually be referring to the person reading the newspaper, the protagonist. And we know Cassie's dad was a fan of Freddy's as a kid, so his childhood will be back in the worst way possible because the characters he loved as a kid are now attacking him. One of them can even kill him. Speaking of, Cassie's dad working at Fazbear's Fright just makes sense. He's a fan of Freddy's, so he wants to work at this attraction based on the franchise's past. And depending on the gap between FNaF 3 and Ruin, he may need money to take care of his recently born daughter. Cassie's dad is actually a very solid theory, although I suppose it does rely on some assumptions, and there are problems with some of the evidence. As for the 395248 code, this could just be reference to Stage 1 because it's a minigame that takes place at Fredbear's, and Cassie's dad is connected to Fredbear's. After all, it's kind of where he and his friends killed the crying child. Or it could just be a random reference, you know, that happens sometimes. As for the Help 1-2 and FNaF 3 parallels, they do not necessarily imply the protagonist between the games is the same person. The arcade conspirator connections rely on Cassie's dad being the arcade conspirator, but also on the guard playing the Happiest Day minigames. So overall, it is a solid theory, but it does have some problems, but I could definitely see him being the guard. Michael is by far the most popular theory for the identity of the guard, and honestly, it makes sense why. Mike is the main protagonist of the original saga, being the protagonist of 1, 4, 5, and 6. The first piece of evidence for Mike being the guard is the quote, "Bring back your childhood in the worst way possible." As I said earlier, this quote may be referring to the protagonist. Also, the protagonist is not named at the end of the game, which could imply they are characters from the past, and we have to figure out who they are, Mike Schmidt. More evidence comes from the logbook, where Foxy is in the FNaF 3 office. Foxy represents Mike, which I've explained multiple times, so I'll just play a clip here. And let me explain why we know Foxy definitely represents Mike and not Phone Guy, who is named Ralph if you didn't know, as revealed in the week before. Foxy representing Ralph is a kind of a popular idea. I mean, Foxy being Mike is definitely more popular, but I still see Ralph every once in a while. The evidence for Ralph is that in FNaF 2, Ralph says Foxy is his favorite, which is reinforced in the week before. Also, some of the quotes on the night pages are similar to stuff Phone Guy would say. You know, what are you still doing here? Whatever else he says, I forgot. And Ralph being in the FNaF 3 office kinda makes sense because his tapes were played in FNaF 3, just ignore that he wasn't a night guard when those tapes were recorded. However, I think it's more likely Foxy is supposed to be Mike, and here's why. Foxy acts as the protagonist of the book, which Mike is. You know, he's the one who writes it and everything. The best evidence for Foxy being Mike is that on the first night page, Foxy is seen reading a magazine in a chair, which is obviously not an office chair, implying this is at Foxy's home and is applying for the job. The magazine is also a sister location reference. It's a Screw Bolts and Hairpins magazine, which was a magazine mentioned in sister location as one of the possible reasons Mike took the job. Further evidence is that in FNaF 4, between nights, there's a minigame called Fun with Plushtrap, where the player, who is Mike, which if you need to know why Mike is the FNaF 4 player, go watch this video on it. Mike goes 1v1 against Plushtrap, who is obviously a reference to Springtrap. And while yes, we now know Plushtrap was a character in the experiments weren't always a plot point, or at least it doesn't seem like they were, so there's probably another explanation for this. And I know that Plushtrap was also a toy that existed before, but it doesn't make sense with him just being a toy because why would Mike have nightmares about him? And it's not just Plushtrap too. With the Halloween update of FNaF 4, 3 new characters were introduced, but only one was canon. Nightmare Balloon Boy. He takes the role of Plushtrap. How do you lure Springtrap away in FNaF 3? You use Balloon Boy's voice lines. I mean, okay, you could argue that it's just because, oh, BB is the smallest, so it makes sense for him to be there, but still, you know, I feel like there could be a deeper connection. Speaking of FNaF 4, the main antagonist of this game is Nightmare, who we learn in the game files is Shadow Freddy. The reason I bring this up is because Shadow Freddy is an Easter egg in FNaF 3. Notice how he looks almost defeated? Perhaps this is because he was defeated by Mike in FNaF 4, and now is just hanging out with Mike until his death in FNaF 6. Alternatively, Fazbear's Fright could be where Shadow Freddy attached to Mike, and he appears like an empty suit to blend in with the location. Another piece of evidence comes from sister location. Clara, who we know thanks to the logbook represents Mike, or at least Mike relates to her, burns down Vlad's house. Vlad is either William or Fazbear Entertainment, it doesn't really matter. The point is Mike or a character Mike relates to burns down one of their houses. If Vlad is William, Fazbear's Fright is where he lives in FNaF 3. If Vlad represents Fazbear Entertainment, Fazbear's Fright houses all their stuff. It's their legacy. This relies on the guard burning down the location. A minor piece of evidence is that the hallucinations the guard has in FNaF 3 are similar to hallucinations Mike has in FNaF 1. What I'm talking about is that the guard can hallucinate posters of Freddy changing to Spring Bonnie. You can also hallucinate the cupcake poster turning to a golden cupcake. This is similar to how in FNaF 1, Mike can hallucinate the Freddy poster changing to one of Freddy ripping off his head, the East Hall posters changing to images of crying children, and the words, "It's me," and the rules poster changing the newspapers about the MCI. And yeah, I know that they aren't exclusive to Mike, but it's still possible that years later he's still having similar hallucinations. And it's possible it was a hint that the guard we played as in 3 was the same as the guard we played as in 1. Further evidence is that in the logbook there's a maze to get to the safe room, and under it Mike draws Freddy, Chica, Foxy, and Ghost costumes with 3 others in the background. Some say this may represent the Phantoms due to the noticeable lack of Bonnie, and the number of animatronics here lining up with the number of Phantoms, and how they are wearing ghost costumes. What's the definition of phantom? A ghost, and also figments of one's imagination. The Phantoms, under Mike being the FNaF 3 guard, are figments of his imagination based not only on the props of the attraction, but the ghosts from his past. Literally. Speaking of the Phantoms, their behavior makes sense with Mike being the guard. They jump scare the player because that's what they try to do to him in the past. And if sister location happened by the time of FNaF 3, it did happen to him. A smaller piece of evidence comes from the movie, where Mike and William have a 1v1 that ends in the building collapsing. Another minor piece of evidence is that all the versions of the Freddy files, there is this guy, Mathman, who is drawn in a similar style to how Mike draws in the survival logbook. It's possible that this is supposed to be a Mike drawing, and Mike makes all the red pen edits in the book in like a meta sense. Obviously it's not something that happens in the timeline because it's not a real book in the timeline. And he is drawing himself destroying Springtrap because that's what he tried to do in FNaF 3. But to be fair, it could just be a coincidence and this means absolutely nothing. But you know, that's why I said it's a minor piece of evidence. Also, if the guard sets up Happiest Day, it makes sense for Mike to set it up as he would be putting his brother back together if you believe the theory that the Happiest Day minigames are the Bite Victim's memories, which I do and I've explained before. In FNaF 6, the game focuses so little on Mike and William's reunion, despite that being what the last game teased at the very end. Maybe the game focuses on it so little because it already happened. The next point is that it just makes sense for Mike to go to Fazbear's Fright. If FNaF 3 is after sister location, it makes sense for Mike to go there because it's the first Freddy adjacent location in years, even if it isn't official, and it's probably his only lead at this point. William would most likely show up here. It's a place that celebrates his crimes, or rumors mainly caused by his crimes. It does seem like William would most likely go here anyway because, you know, his ego. Also, where else would he have to check, assuming at this point he already checked everywhere else? This is the last place he has to go. Basically, my point is here, it makes logical sense for Mike to work there. And if the game is before sister location, which I know a lot of people think is debunked due to the logbook having the FNaF 3 office and Mike references sister location, it's technically possible that logbook is like a meta book and like doesn't actually happen in the timeline and it's just meant to confirm lore, not something that, you know, actually does happen in the timeline. If FNaF 3 is before sister location, Mike would be working there just for a job, or because he was contacted by the Fright crew personally since he was the last guard at Freddy's. Or who knows, maybe he was looking for William already. I don't know why, but maybe. Finally, many people argue that the final sister location cutscene shows the outcome of Mike finding his father, while also showing that William survived their encounter and now they have to meet again in FNaF 6. That's totally up for interpretation though. Some people argue that FNaF 3 fire is what caused the speech, seeing Afton in the newspaper sent Mike on his quest to find his father, or that the speech is setting up their meeting in FNaF 6 only, with Mike saying I'm going to come find you and then Afton rising to show Mike will find him sometime after this speech. Now let's talk about the problems with Mike being the guard. In FNaF 6, Afton says,
"You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me."
If Mike encountered Springtrap like last week, how would he not recognize him? But counterpoint to this, it mainly relies on the assumption that SCRAPPED is just a more withered Springtrap. If SCRAPPED does look as different as he does out of universe in universe, then this line probably is just about the redesign. Well, okay, it's about the redesign anyway, like from a meta sense, but I mean Mike assumes William might not recognize him because he looks different, under Mike being the FNaF 3 guard. Judging from how Scott refused to answer the question about SCRAPPED's redesign, Daco said Scott said it was a lore question, and everyone else in this game has a lore reason for their designs. I think he probably does look very different in universe. Although, I guess this is not the best argument, but you could argue William is simply talking about their first meeting in general in FNaF 3, under Mike being the guard, if the redesign isn't canon. So you guys know how Mike is a purple corpse, right? Some people say Mike couldn't possibly work at Fazbear's Fright due to his condition. Why would the Fright crew hire a walking corpse? And the Fright guard breathes when he's jump scared. This can easily be explained as the whole corpse plotline didn't exist when FNaF 3 was made. But it can also be explained in-universe. As for the breathing, Mike does sigh during his speech. Sighing is just breathing, so he does have the ability to breathe. As for why he is hired, it is a horror attraction after all, and he will be playing the security guard. Maybe the guard would be dead, which is why Mike is the best choice. Or they just straight up did not care. Or maybe Mike's whole body did regenerate with Remnant, but I doubt that. Some people also say that Mike working at Fazbear's Fright contradicts him saying he's been living in shadows, but not really. First of all, he's working the night shift. Although we've seen what we found, Hudson does work both the day shift and night shift. While he is going to act like the guard, it doesn't seem like that was always planned. Some people take issue with how friendly Phone Dude is, meaning that he and the guard must be friends, but not really. He could just be a friendly guy. Anyway, back to some more problems with the theory. As for foxing the logbook, while yes, it is good evidence on the surface, we actually don't know if this was intentional. It could have just been a creative liberty taken by the artist. And while I don't like playing the whole "it was a mistake" card, knowing the history of this franchise, especially when it comes to books, it's entirely possible. But counterpoint to that, the logbook would probably be given extra importance compared to stuff like guidebooks. So it may not be a mistake. We just aren't sure. We don't know for sure. So it could be evidence. You can use it as evidence, but maybe it's not the strongest. I don't know. As for Mike setting up Happiest Day, in his speech, he says the last thing he has to do is find William. He never mentions wanting to free the souls. Although this could be a secondary goal of his, something he would do if he could. Or Mike's speech is likely non-diegenic, meaning it doesn't actually happen, in the timeline. It could just be showing us his motives purely going into FFPS. If helping his brother and the children was a goal of his, he would have already completed it. The last thing he has to do is find William after he survived the fire. As for everything else, the Immortal and Restless parallel, the FNaF 4 stuff, and the Phantoms of the Logbook, there are alternative explanations that I will talk about later. Although I guess the FNaF 4 parallels could just mean nothing and just be explained by the experiments. I don't know. They do feel pretty intentional, but whatever. Also, the movie just straight up isn't good evidence, to be honest. When you simplify it, it does make sense, but taking more into account, it doesn't really hold up. Where was Abby and Vanessa during FNaF 3? And the movie doesn't end in a fire? The main problem people have with Mike Guard, though, is that from a narrative perspective, it is a tad repetitive. Have a game where Mike finds his dad, goes up against the ghost of his past, and possibly helps free the spirits, and then ends in a fire, and then a month later, Mike finds his dad, goes up against the ghost of his past, and helps free the spirits, and it ends in a fire. Again, that's all subjective, though, and doesn't debunk the theory. I don't have a problem with it, as I think FNaF 3 does all these plot lines better. Again, doesn't matter to the theory itself. Let's just move on to our last candidate. Before I talk about Hudson, I should give a recap of the What We Found story. What We Found follows the story of Hudson, the security guard at Fazbear's Fright. Hudson is a deeply damaged person. Literally. He has nerve damage. Hudson's life in general is just kind of terrible. He was always bullied at school, particularly by his math teacher, Mr. Acton. But the abuse didn't stop at school. When he came home, Hudson was abused by his stepfather, Lewis. One day, Hudson burns down his house, killing his stepfather and accidentally killing his mother. This doesn't help Hudson's social status, as he is now an outcast pretty much. His only real friends are Barry and Dwayne, who got him a job at Fazbear's Fright, but they'll be gone soon too, as they are going out to the military. Hudson visits his grandma, who tells him to quit his job at Fazbear's Fright, but he doesn't listen. One day, Barry and Dwayne find an animatronic to use for Fazbear's Fright, Springtrap. They hook him up on the wall. Hudson goes to check it out during his night shift and notices that there is a human corpse inside. At this point, Springtrap becomes active and starts hunting Hudson. Hudson runs and hides throughout the night while dealing with the hallucinations based on the props in the attraction, even a Chica animatronic. In the end, Hudson hides in an oven. Unfortunately for him, the oven turns on, killing Hudson. The next day, Barry and Dwayne return to the location where Springtrap is still hooked on the wall, and they supposedly find Hudson's body. Now, that was just a very brief summary of the story. I didn't get into every detail, just the important things. I recommend reading the story, as it's pretty good. With the summary of the story out of the way, let's talk about the evidence for Hudson being the FNaF 3 guard in the games. The first major piece of evidence is that Scott Cawthon said that Fazbear's Frights would fill in blanks from the past games, even stating they would go against some things the community liked. And then there's a story about a security guard going up against Springtrap in a horror attraction, Fazbear's Fright, while also facing hallucinations caused by Springtrap's presence. And while the story does seem to be in a different continuity, it wouldn't be the first time characters from separate continuities carried over to the games. For example, Henry and Charlie. Or for an example in Fazbear's Fright, Coming Home doesn't seem to be in the game's continuity, but it still focuses on Susie, a character from the games. What we found could be a similar situation. It focuses on the FNaF 3 guard, but it's in a different continuity to tell its own story. Some may call out how Hudson's events in What We Found are completely different to FNaF 3. However, in the movie, the events Mike goes through are different from the games, but that's still the same character, Mike Schmidt, although he isn't an Afton in that continuity. Well, we don't know that for sure, but he probably isn't. Unless movie 2 confirms he is, then I don't know. And now the evidence for Hudson being the guard in the games includes that phone dude talks to the player like a friend, and some people believe he is Dwayne from the story. Though it isn't necessary that phone dude is Dwayne, because in the story, Hudson is friendly with the majority of the crew. Also, look at the phantoms. Notice that they are burnt? This could be explained by Hudson's fire-related trauma. Also, Hudson could be the reason foul play isn't ruled out at the end of the game. When one of the employees of this place has a history of arson, you can't rule out the possibility of them burning the place down. And Hudson burning the place down makes sense. He was overwhelmed with what was happening, and in response, burned the place down by messing with the faulty wiring. Maybe dying in the process, explaining why he doesn't have a paycheck. Although I still feel like if the guard died, the newspaper would have said something. I don't know. In the Ultimate Guide, the book implies Hudson is the FNaF 3 guard, with this section. Is Hudson the night guard from FNaF 3? In general, the events of the story seem to follow the events of FNaF 3 almost down to the letter, right down to the ending. Hudson also experiences hallucinations throughout the night while dealing with Springtrap. Also, shortly after FNaF 4 came out, Scott said the story was found rather quickly. At this time, a majority of people thought we played as a random guy. Hudson is a random guy. He doesn't even have any connection to Freddy's outside of working at Fazbear's Fright. Now let's talk about some problems with Hudson being the guard. The logbook, of course, has Mike in the office. Assuming that isn't a mistake, it heavily points towards Mike being the guard. In fact, I'd basically say confirms it, but I guess there are alternative explanations I'll talk about later. As for the Ultimate Guide, it's already wrong here. It says the events follow the FNaF 3 story right down to the letter, which is just not true. It also doesn't say definitively that Hudson is the guard. It asks if he is. And it's not like the Ultimate Guide is the most reliable source. It implies that Ella from 1:35 a.m. is the same as from the novels, and that is impossible. There's also the phantoms. Them being burnt does make sense with Hudson's fire-related trauma, but here's the thing, them being burnt just makes sense to everyone on this list. It's foreshadowing the end of the game for one, and Photo Dude mentions multiple times that the building can catch on fire, so it's possible the guard is paranoid about that, and that paranoia is carrying over to their hallucinations. Also, the phantoms what we found are not burnt, or at least never stated to be, and you think they would call that out. Some people take issue with what we found's numerous differences between it and FNaF 3, but it's also an 80-page story and not a full game. The main thing for Hudson Guard is that Hudson exists as the guard, and the characters have carried over to different continuities all the time, which is true. Although, to be fair, it is not unusual for characters to also not carry over if they do not fit the story. For example, in the novels, Michael Brooks possesses Golden Freddy. He does not in the games. It also seems like the Golden Freddy kid in the movie is also going to be a new character. Also in the movies, Mike's younger sister is Abby. It's Elizabeth in the games. The guard in the game could be someone else, and Hudson could just be a stand-in for them. However, we run into the problem of why was the story written then, and a series meant to fill in gaps, if not to show Hudson is the FNaF 3 guard. There are a few ideas thrown out there. One is that it was made to explain the phantoms, which can work. Some also say that the story did point to the guard's identity, but saying that Mike is the guard and Hudson is a parallel or adaptation of Mike's character, which I do want to talk about real quick. Is Hudson and Mike parallel? They do share some similarities. For example, both are night guards at a Freddy adjacent location, both accidentally kill a family member, both burn alive. Mike was most likely abused by Afton in some ways. Hudson was abused by his stepfather and his math teacher, Mr. Acton, a very similar name to Afton, but that's where the majority of their similarities end. As a kid, Hudson was bullied. Mike was a bully and was never bullied as far as we know. However, I do believe the similarities between them are intentional, since if Scott's making the story to debunk Mike being the guard, he would have to think about Mike. I could see Hudson being some weird adaptation of Mike's character if he isn't the guard, with enough differences to make him his own character separate from Mike. However, if he is the guard, then these were probably intentional to kind of make Hudson kind of similar to Mike, since Scott does know the community does like Mike as the guard, or Hudson is just reflecting Mike's character, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist in the same continuity, you know? They parallel each other, sure, but they still exist in the same continuity. So now, let's compare Mike and Hudson evidence, since they do seem to be our most likely candidates. As you can probably tell, they both have really good evidence. Usually, in a situation like this, I would use Occam's razor and choose the simplest solution, but I'm not sure if that applies here, since both solutions make sense and are pretty simple. Hudson makes sense with how Scott said Fazbear's Fright was meant to fill in blanks for the past, but the story is very inaccurate to FNaF 3. Mike makes sense with the logbook and some minor things here and there, but then Hudson exists. So when we come down to it, which one do I believe? Well, I think I'm leaning towards Hudson, honestly. I just think what we found was likely made to give us an identity to the guard and show us just this random guy Hudson. Like seriously, if Mike is the guard, why didn't Scott just write what we found to be about Mike? It's not like he wasn't comfortable writing about him, since he shows up as a major character in the story You're the Band. Although I guess that is a scrap story. I don't know, I guess under Mike guard you could argue maybe Mike didn't fit the story Scott wanted to tell, but then why not just make a story that fits Mike better? Hudson being being the guard also makes the fire at the end of the game a bit more personal. But I don't know, there are just so many little things that point towards Mike being involved with FNaF 3. It makes me think that Mike is connected to the game somehow. Some people have also tried to make both Mike and Hudson work. There is my Fright Guard duo theory, although I find that very unlikely. Some say Mike is the guard we play as in game, and what we found is a prequel or sequel with Eleanor's Springtrap. This is cool, and I have come close to believing it is a prequel, and I could see myself believing in it or the sequel option in the future depending on the circumstances, but as of now I don't think that's what Scott is going for. I did come up with a couple ideas for how all the evidence for both Mike and Hudson can work while writing this video. One of them is that Mike went to Fazbear's Fright after the fire to look for William and was somehow able to see the Phantom, which is possible since the Phantoms show up in Help Wanted, which is based on the in-universe FNaF 3 game, so it's possible that other people can see the Phantoms. And then Shadow Freddy followed him home, and FNaF 4 happened, explaining the FNaF 3 parallels in the gameplay. The only problem I have with this is that nothing really points towards Mike going to Fazbear's Fright post-fire. Another idea I had is that Mike burned down Fazbear's Fright, which is implied in The Immortal and the Restless, and then Shadow Freddy followed him home, and then the FNaF 3 gameplay stuff could work. While there, Mike sees the Phantom somehow. Although, I guess the ghost drawing could just mean nothing, since on this page Mike is drawing them as ghosts when they get to the safe room. That's what I thought for a while, but honestly, I do think it probably is the Phantoms. If there was a Bonnie and the member of the animatronics didn't line up with the number of Phantoms, yeah, I would think they're just ghosts. But like, I don't know, the exclusion of Bonnie is pretty weird. And the safe room still makes sense with them being the Phantoms, as that's where Afton was found, and it's heavily implied he is in some way responsible for the Phantom. Anyways, Mike would burn down the attraction, and yeah, might be wondering how Mike knows to go and burn down the attraction. I don't know. Probably some 0-point field shit. Or maybe I'm just forcing something to try and make all the pieces fit. I do have a problem with the idea of Mike burning down Fazbear's Fright though, as it takes away from Hudson, and it would make Hudson the most pointless protagonist in the franchise besides maybe Fritz. He doesn't even burn the place down and release Springtrap, which would make him actually do something important for the story, which sucks because I do like Hudson. He is a great character. I don't mind if Hudson is the guard, I just think I would prefer it to be someone with a connection to Freddy's at least. I'd like it when the characters are connected to Freddy's personally, what can I say? Although overall, Mike would probably be the best choice for the guard in my opinion. Like I've said before, FNaF 3 is a game-long boss fight. Mike being the one who goes up against this boss fight is just much more satisfying in my opinion. I also feel like Mike fits the themes of this game pretty well. The whole thing is, don't revive old tragedies from the past, and Mike would be contributing to this theme because he would be reliving or reviving his past as a security guard. Furthermore, I feel like Fazbear's Fright is supposed to represent the bite victim being put back together in some way. It's supposed to be like all the memories of Freddy's in one place. If you watch my Dream Theory Was Never Canon video, I think the bite victim's memories went on to influence the rest of the timeline, so it'd be like all the bite victim's memories are in one place, put back together. Not to mention the Happy Stay minigames are also played in this game, which are the bite victim's memories being put back together. So overall, it would make sense to have Mike be the protagonist when this is happening because he caused it. Furthermore, it's also based on the tragedies of Freddy's, tragedies which I believe Mike indirectly caused because I believe William only started killing after the crying child's death. I don't think it was Mike's fault, obviously, it's all William's fault, and that is just a theory, that's just my interpretation of the narrative, but under my interpretation, I feel like Mike does fit the best as the protagonist, because he would be facing the tragedies that he indirectly caused, or that he feels he indirectly caused. It's just what I think, though. I could be completely wrong. Maybe William was killing before the bite victim's death. Oh, so a 1v1 between the main protagonist and antagonist is just too good, man. I know it might be a little repetitive, but I don't care. Honestly, I feel like FNaF 6 being round 2 between Mike and William makes that game's better, and I don't really care if they faced off a little bit before that. Of course, none of this actually matters since Hudson is the guard, but I just want to get my thoughts out there. So to finally end this video, I want to rank the candidates based on how likely they are. Number 7, we have Sammy. He just has no evidence. Number 6 is William. Pretty interesting idea, but I don't think it's what Scott is going for. Number 5, Fritz. Pretty good under just 1 to 3. Outside of that, he doesn't really hold up though. 4, Henry. Decent theory, but the evidence can be explained without him being the guard. 3, Cassie's dad. Really good and underrated theory. I could see him being the guard, it's just that the other 2 candidates have more evidence as of now. Number 2, Mike. Great theory. Would believe this one if number 1 didn't exist. Number 1, Hudson. Not only a good theory, but most likely what Scott is going for. So in the end, I'm sure you can see why the Fright Guard debate is frustrating. Both of the primary theories have good evidence, and both seem equally likely. I think this is one of the things that needs more clarification, honestly. Does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? No. So who do you guys think the guard is? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, tell me what you think of the 2 theories I proposed at the end of this video. But right before you do that, you should like and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Hopefully it won't be so long. If there's one thing Five Nights at Freddy's is known for, it's the confusing timeline. Although over the past 10 years, the community has come to an almost complete understanding of the series' timeline. Notice how I said almost? That's because there is one game in this franchise that the community still hasn't come to a complete consensus on when it takes place, well, relative to its place in the narrative. Besides the year of FNaF 2, almost every game's year is debated, but who gives a shit about that? A game, of course, being Sister Location, that means on the title. The only thing we really know about this game's timeline is that it's sometime before FNaF 6. Other than that, it's basically all over the place. Some people argue it's before FNaF 2, some people argue it's after FNaF 3, so that's a pretty small range of time it can happen. I've made a video going over this game's confusing timeline before, but to be honest, it kinda sucks, and I want to redo it, and I also got called out on Twitter for it, so yeah. First things first, let's talk about why Sister Location is not before FNaF 2, or 1. Which I'm pretty sure is the community consensus outside like the theorizing section of the community. The evidence for this is that Fritz Smith, who is speculated to be Michael Afton, gets fired for odor. The odor could be from Mike being a rotting corpse. There's also the hand unit saying that Circus Baby's Entertainment Rentals opened after the closure of a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but he never said which one, so he could be talking about the first Freddy's opened before FNaF 2. Sister Location being before FNaF 2 also gives Michael a motivation for working at FNaF 1 and 2. He is looking for his father. There's also the logbook, which may be during FNaF 1. In this book, Mike references Sister Location, so obviously Sister Location would have already had to happen. So with all that out of the way, here's why Sister Location being before FNaF 2 is most likely incorrect. Looking at the evidence first, as for the odor, not only does this rely on the assumption that Mike is Fritz, which is not confirmed and I disagree with, the odor can also be explained in other ways rather than him being a rotten corpse. Ralph says that the animatronics in FNaF 2 smell awful. Alright, Ralph doesn't outright say it, but like, come on, that's obviously what he's implying when he says, and the smell, ugh. Like he's saying the smell is why the wizards weren't reused. Fritz tampered with and had direct contact with those animatronics. Because of that, Fritz smells bad. It's pretty straightforward, I think. Same thing that probably happened with Mike in FNaF 1. He tampered with the animatronics that, as Ralph said, haven't had a bath, so Mike smells bad. Furthermore, in Help Wanted, Tape Girl says that when companies want to fire someone, they'll find little things to build up a case. So maybe that's what Fazbear Entertainment was doing with Mike and Fritz. They were using odor as a little thing to fire them because, well, they probably saw something they weren't supposed to see. In Fritz's case, probably the DCI's bodies, and in Mike's case, probably Ralph's body or something, I don't know. So yeah, the odor doesn't really point towards Mike being a walking corpse at the time. Hand Unit's line is just telling us when the rental service started, not when the game takes place. As for Sister Location being before FNaF 1 giving Mike a motive, yeah, it does, but there's multiple different motivations Mike could have for working at the FNaF 1 location. He was working under William's orders, he just needed a job and kept coming back because of his brother, he was investigating Freddy's, 0 Point Field, on and on and on. Sister Location doesn't need to happen before FNaF 1 to give Mike a motivation is what I'm saying. Also, and this is not the strongest argument, but Sister Location being before FNaF 1 means William is trapped in the safe room during Mike's shift. If that's true, Mike would have found William. There's a part in the Fazbear's Fright books where the narrator says William Afton has an unmistakable energy, so Mike would have found William, and yeah, the games would have ended pretty early. Not the best argument since obviously it wasn't planned out back then, but still thought I should bring it up just because this line is really funny. As for the logbook, I have to admit it is pretty good evidence for Sister Location happening before FNaF 1, if it is during FNaF 1, but we don't know of that for sure. It could be during FNaF 3, it could be a meta book, it could be fucking during the Pizzaplex, who knows? I really need to make that logbook video. But there's something else that, in my opinion, proves Sister Location is after FNaF 1. Before I get into the definitive reasons Sister Location is after FNaF 1, I have to ask you guys to subscribe. I want to hit 2,500 subscribers before the end of April, and subscribing would be a massive help. So definitely subscribe to help me out. But now let's talk about the real reason Sister Location has to be after FNaF 1. The Follow Me minigames. There are minigames that are played between the nights of FNaF 3. They depict William Afton dismantling the main 4 animatronics before being attacked by the spirits within the shells and getting spring-locked. The reason I bring these up is because it's heavily implied, borderline confirmed, that the original missing children are within the Funtime animatronics. I won't go into too much detail about that today. There are multiple videos going over it that you can watch after this one. Anyways, for this to be true, William must have gotten the MCI's remnant from the classics. And the only point we know of that this can happen is Follow Me, where he destroys the animatronics. We know that William was missing by the time of Mike's speech, which likely takes place a little bit after Ennard leaves his body. He's saying he's going to come find William, which implies William is missing. This lines up with Follow Me, since William would be missing in the safe room. So that means Follow Me is before Sister Location. So when does Follow Me take place? Before or after FNaF 1? The evidence for it being before FNaF 1 is the buttons on Freddy and Bonnie. They lack these buttons in FNaF 1, but their withered counterparts have the buttons, so that must mean these are the unwithered animatronics before FNaF 1, right? Furthermore, we already see that some part of the children's souls are at Freddy's during the final Follow Me minigame, which should be after their endos are taken, meaning some part of their souls are attached to the shells. So theoretically, if the animatronics were rebuilt, the children could still possess them. On their own, these are fair arguments, but Follow Me is almost definitely after FNaF 1, and here's why. As for the buttons, I think we can safely say these aren't a major timeline hint. Why? Because in the final Follow Me minigame, we see William spring Bonnie's suit without a button. However, in-game, Springtrap has a button. This shows to us that the buttons don't really matter. If Scott cared enough to add them to Freddy and Bonnie, why wouldn't he add them to Spring Bonnie? Not convinced? Take a look at FNaF 2. In the Save the minigame, the player takes control of Withered Freddy. The Freddy that has the button, but look at his design. No button. It's just not there. This means the minigame sprites aren't the most accurate things ever. And Scott probably just added the buttons because it looks better with them than without them. Also, the location Follow Me is very clearly abandoned. There are boards on the wall and the place is leaking. But none of this is as concrete as the thing that proves Follow Me is after FNaF 1. It's FNaF 3 itself. In FNaF 3, one of the most prominent features is the mascot heads that can be seen throughout the location. Notice how they are all torn up and lacking their endos, just like how they are after Follow Me. The Steam description also points out that only the empty shells are found, which means that even when FNaF 3 released, William was taking the endos in Follow Me. For Follow Me to be before FNaF 1, the animatronics would have to be rebuilt, then dismantled again just like they were in Follow Me. That seems overly convoluted and isn't really implied anywhere. So if Follow Me is after FNaF 1, and Sister Location is after Follow Me, or at least the first 4 minigames, Sister Location is after FNaF 1. So we've narrowed down when Sister Location can happen a little bit, but can we narrow it down even further? We sure can try. I am 100% confident Sister Location is after FNaF 1, but is it before or after FNaF 3? Well, this is where things get pretty complicated. The casting call from Michael Afton says that Mike is between the ages of 18 and 35, which should mean that at the latest, Sister Location can be in the early to mid 2000s. However, Henry is listed as being middle-aged in FNaF 6, and he should be in his 70s, not exactly middle-aged. So it seems that the casting calls are not a reliable source. However, PJ Haywood did say Michael was a younger character than William. The reason this is important is because, assuming FNaF 3 is in 2023, hell, it even makes sense even if it's in 2015, Michael would be as old, maybe even older than, William in the opening cutscene.
She can dance. She can sing. She's equipped with a built-in helium tech for inflating balloons right at her fingertips. She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream.
Father, it's me, Michael. I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be.
I consider PJ Haywood to be a more reliable source, as he said Scott is very direct with what he wants. If he wanted Mike to sound younger than William, Mike is younger than William. However, there are other important aspects to consider here, one of which being that Sister Location was originally going to be the final game, and we don't know if this includes a custom-made update or not, so let's just assume Scott's talking about only the main game. I feel like if Sister Location was the final game, it would have to be before FNaF 3, because of the missing children being in the Fun Times. We don't know for sure if the so-called Fun Times MCI was always Scott's original intention, but since some people were able to figure it out before FNaF 6 release, and I see no reason for Scott to retcon it into being the case, we can assume it was always the intention. We also know that Sister Location was made in response to people not really understanding FNaF 4's story.
The ones, yeah, there were mysteries. 4 ended up just too mysterious to the point where you really couldn't, there was no real way to figure out what was going on. And it left people unsatisfied. And like I said, with jumping from 3 to 4, I knew that I had to go in and straighten that out. It's like, people aren't really happy with this. I need to make another game. I need to kind of ground this again, not necessarily in reality, but I need to ground it in kind of storytelling.
And most of the game is kind of explaining the FNaF 4 story. Now, I made a video on what I think FNaF 4's original story was, and the MCI were actually an important part of the story that no one really understood. So bringing them back would be something Scott would do to explain the role in the story. I think Ennard is supposed to represent the bite victim being put back together, the MCI all coming together to form one entity, with Elizabeth there too. If you want more information on that, make sure to watch my other video. This is important because if Sister Location was after FNaF 3, the series would end with the missing children not moving on. They would just be in Mike's body forever. This is not only an unsatisfying ending, but I'm not sure if Scott would want to end the story without the children moving on. However, since Elizabeth never moves on with Sister Location being the original ending, I guess I could see it. But if Sister Location is after FNaF 3, we have to ask why Michael waited so many years to go and help his sister. We have no reason to think Mike would wait at all to go put Elizabeth back together. Well, when Sister Location originally came out, now with the new story, we do have some new stuff, like the theory of Vanessa being an Afton, which I do believe could possibly explain Mike waiting. He would have to take care of her. But I'm talking about before security breach and all that came out. When it originally came out, why would he wait? Now, Mike did say in his speech that he found something, which means William left him something to look for, but he also says it's right where William said it would be. be. So if he had to look, he probably wouldn't have to look very far. Anyways, the reason I bring this all up is because it doesn't make much sense for Mike to wait to help Elizabeth, so he probably didn't. Some people say William could have left a note or a voice recording from Mike in case of his death and Follow Me, and Mike took a while to find that, but that's a headcanon. Another thing people use to say sister location is during or after FNaF 3 is that during Mike's speech, we see the aftermath of the FNaF 3 fire, so the speech could be happening during the visuals of the cutscene. And while that could be true, it doesn't mean sister location is during or after FNaF 3 because, well, it's possible there's a gap between Ender leaving Mike's body and the speech, since Mike says he's living in shadows. Also, the audio and the visuals might just not line up. So sister location is probably not during or after FNaF 3 due to Mike being said to be a younger character than William, and it not making much sense for Mike to wait. The only way it really works is if Mike is the FNaF 3 guard and William asked him during or after the fire, but I very much doubt that, since at that point they would have both tried to kill each other. So sister location is after FNaF 1, but before FNaF 3, and this is the common consensus in the theorizing section of the community. But can we narrow it down to a year? No, but we can get a time frame. The Faz vs. Fright story You're the Band takes place in 2015. However, Mike is in the story, and noticeably he is not a purple zombie. He is said to look like he's in his 20s, but this is honestly a minor thing as age has never really mattered in this franchise. For example, Charlie is said to be 17 in the Silver Eyes, but in the fourth closet is revealed she was born in 1980. The Silver Eyes takes place in 1995, meaning she would be 15. There's also Edwin's whole age thing in Tales, and a lot of examples in Faz vs. Fright. So clearly age is not something Scott puts much thought into. What's important is that Mike and the protagonist, Sylvia, visit Freddy's and the animatronics are intact and can move, implying that Follow Me and sister location haven't happened yet. However, it should be noted this was a cut story, and it was just released in a bonus book that you can't even buy by itself, you have to buy it with a book set. And while I'm sure it wasn't written with the intention to be scrapped, what's canon is dubious, so it can really only be used as supporting evidence if anything. But if this is still canon, sister location is sometime after 2015. Preferably it would be in 2015 so it can be 30 years after Elizabeth's death, and we do know Scott likes his 30-year anniversaries. If you think Elizabeth dies in 1987 or after, then those years work just as well as long as it's before 2023, depending on your timeline when FNaF 3 takes place. However, like I said, the story was scrapped. There is something else we can use to pin down a year for sister location, or rather someone, Vanessa. Now what I'm going to say is probably controversial here on YouTube, but I do believe Vanessa is an Afton, William's daughter to be exact, not Mike's. I'm not going over all the evidence for the theory today, but I do plan on making a video about it in the future, so be on the lookout for that. However, let's just assume Vanessa is an Afton for the sake of the rest of this video. Vanessa being an Afton can definitely help us pin down the year's sister location, or at least a range of time it can happen. Vanessa is said to be 23 during FNaF AR. Now we don't know the gap between FNaF AR and Security Breach, but I'm pretty sure they happen very close together, so we'll see Vanessa is also 23 there. And I know what you're thinking, Vanessa's age was revealed in unreleased emails. Can we really use these? And I'd say probably. Vanessa's last name was revealed to start with A in the emails as well, and on her official Game Jolt page it also starts with an A, meaning the info here is probably accurate. I'm not entirely sure if Vanessa is 23 though, since her email is Nest97. Usually when there are two numbers like that at the end of a username, it's the year the user was born, which in this case would be 1997, and it seemed like the emails were written as if they were in 2020, which is when they were written in the real world. In the FNaF AR emails they have a date of 2019 in the Ultimate Guide, and what's interesting is that they didn't remove this, so it could actually point towards special delivery being in 2019, although I've heard this is actually the date that they were written IRL, but I haven't actually seen anyone explain why that is, so if someone could explain that in the comments, let me know. It seems more just like an assumption. Anyway, that either means FNaF AR is in 2020, or they were just written like they were written in the current year, but the actual events happened later in the timeline. Anyways, it's possible whoever wrote the emails thought Vanessa was 23 since she was born in 1997, but she was actually much older. But then again, you could argue it says she was born in 1997 because Vanessa is 23, and the emails were written as if they were in 2020. So I'm not sure. Let's just assume she is 23 though. If she is, we can use it to help us get a time frame of when sister location takes place. If Security Breach is in 2029, she would be born in 2006, and if it's in 2035, she would be born in 2012. We don't know how old she was during the court case mentioned in the therapy tapes, and a child of any age can be a witness in a court hearing, but let's just say she's 5. So that means at the earliest, sister location is in 2011, if Security Breach is in 2029, in 2017 if it's in 2035. And if FNaF AR really is in 2020, then 2022 is the earliest it can take place. Now I don't know if I'm onto anything here or if I'm on something, but since I do think Vanessa is an Afton, I will say that I do think sister location is in the 2010s or at least sometime after FNaF 1. However, we aren't done yet. There's another game here to consider, FNaF 4's gameplay. Does sister location take place before or after FNaF 4's gameplay? We know that FNaF 4's gameplay has to be at least after FNaF 1 because you can hear Rao's phone call from night 1 of FNaF 1. The gameplay is also very similar to FNaF 1. So is sister location before or after this gameplay? Well, I actually think it's sometime before. First of all, let's speak about the narrative. The main antagonist of this game is Nightmare, and in UCN, Nightmare says,
"I am your wickedness, made of flesh."
He is saying this to William, which most likely means that Nightmare represents William's evil in some way. That means if Sister Locations after FNaF 4's gameplay, Michael defeated the physical manifestation of his father's evil, and then a few years later went and helped his father out. That's silly. It makes much more sense for Michael to defeat his father's evil after he's already on his quest to find and most likely kill his dad. Hell, you could even say that him defeating Nightmare is what inspires him to start looking for William, since he has proven to himself he can defeat him. For some actual evidence, we have Nightmare Fredbear's stomach mouth. Since Nightmare Fredbear has only ever appeared in Mike's dreams, not showing up in Didophobia, I think it's possible that Nightmare Fredbear is a physical manifestation of Mike's guilt at failing to protect his siblings. He is Fredbear for obvious reasons, and he has the stomach mouth because of Elizabeth's death. This would even explain why Nightmare takes his form. It's like William would use Michael's guilt against him, maybe. I don't know. I literally just thought of that while I was reading this out. This would most likely indicate Sister Location is before FNaF 4, since we have no reason to assume Mike knows how Elizabeth dies prior to Sister Location. And if you're wondering how Mike knows how she died, on night 3, Mike can go to the gallery and listen to Baby describe Elizabeth's death. But none of this is as concrete as the logbook, which shows us that Mike has already gone through the events of Sister Location. But Nightmare Fredbear is drawn under a section about recent dreams, meaning Mike has already gone through Sister Location while having the FNaF 4 nightmares. So Sister Location is after FNaF 1 in the 2010s, but before FNaF 4 and 3. Honestly, I think Sister Location will probably get a date soon, with a new book called Secret Artifacts, which is said to have some things from Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals. It's possible we'll get something from Sister Location's time with a date on it. To be honest, I don't really like Sister Location being in the 2010s. I think the 90s or 2000s fit better. Also, you guys might have noticed I didn't mention the story Didophobia in this video, and that's because I'm not sure if it's before or after Sister Location, and also because I knew people would argue it's not canon. I didn't want to deal with that. I think you can make a compelling argument for it being before or after. Oh, and I have a mini theory I want to share with you guys that is related to all this, but I didn't know how to fit it in with the rest of the video. My theory goes that Follow Me 1 to 4 happened before Sister Location, but not the final one. This can fix the narrative issue with William waiting like 20 years to go and get the animatronics for his experiments. But then, after Ennard scooped Mike, William noticed the MCI were inside Mike and goes to get his spring Bonnie suit to try and control the children or to protect himself. But when he goes there, he gets spring locked. That way, when Mike comes to, William is missing and he has to look for him. I actually might start believing this since it fixes a lot of issues with the timeline for me, but I'm not sure. So guys, what do you think? Did I solve Sister Location's timeline placement? Or am I wrong and it happens before FNaF 2 or after FNaF 3? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. One thing the FNaF franchise was famous for was how it just wouldn't end. Every game in the original series, except for FNaF 2, was meant to be the end of the story, but just kept going, and now we're on game 11. The reason the games kept coming out is pretty simple. The reason they kept going after FNaF 1 is for money, obviously, but from FNaF 3 onwards, the games continued because there was something the fanbase wasn't satisfied with that Scott tried to rectify with another game. People thought Springtrap's jump scare wasn't scary, so Scott made FNaF 4 with jump scares that packed a bigger punch and had a darker story. However, that story was told in a very confusing way, leaving the fanbase frustrated and disappointed. So Scott made Sister Location to ground the storytelling again. And while Sister Location told a great story, it wasn't a very satisfying ending, and left too many loose ends, so FNaF 6 was made to tie up said loose ends. That's 4 times Scott tried to end this series, 5 if you want to count FNaF World. Now technically this series isn't over yet, since like I said earlier, new games are still coming out, but that's a new story arc. Even though it is a sequel to the Afton story, it's common online to see people argue about which of these endings was the best. The common opinion is FNaF 6. FNaF 3 is a popular choice too, and that got me thinking, which ending really is the best? Well, that's what I want to figure out today, so sit back, relax, and watch as I try to figure out when FNaF should have ended. Before I get into that though, I will not be including FNaF 1 in this ranking, even though it was technically supposed to be the ending since it was made as a standalone game. The reason I won't be including it is because it was made before the story became this story that it is now. And like I said, it was just meant to be a standalone game, not really an ending to a series. This is also my video and I can do whatever I want. But if you want to know where I would put it, FNaF 1 would probably be in last place. Don't get me wrong, FNaF 1 is a great game, but as a story, it's pretty boring before the rest of the series recontextualized it. Now it's actually one of my favorites in the series, story-wise. But the story with just FNaF 1 is just, before the game starts, some guy kills kids at Freddy's, stuffs their body into the animatronics, and gets arrested. The kids possess the animatronics and come to life at night and start attacking and killing people. One of the people they kill is Phone Guy, who recorded messages for the next guard. Mike starts working there, and then he is fired. Like I said, a great horror experience, but a boring story. But you know what's not a boring story? In last place, we have a game that you might not have known was originally supposed to be the end of the series. But it was, as we know, thanks to a couple of comments made by Scott. I don't blame anyone for not knowing this though, or assuming Sister Location was never intended to be the end. While Sister Location's ending is a pretty decent ending to the game itself, as an ending to a series, it's not very good. I mean, straight off the bat, the ending feels like a cliffhanger. It just felt like there was something more to explore after this game's events. This game also doesn't tie up any loose ends, unlike the previous 2 games. This game introduced multiple new concepts that need elaboration, like the fact that William Afton, who up to this point was a relatively normal serial killer, who maybe had some obsession with life after death and wanted to understand the paranormal, had a secret bunker where he ran experiments on animatronics and children. This is cool and all, but it just needs elaboration. Also, those experiments in general, what's up with those? Why does William have a recreation of the FNaF 4 bedroom? Not to mention the original missing children being in the fun times was probably a plot point at the time of the game's release. What happened to them after this? Do they move on in FNaF 3, or do they just live in Mike's body forever? What about Happy's Day? There are just too many loose ends left for this to be an ending. Now, there are ways to make it work as an ending, but you'd have to rewrite the story, or we'd just have to make shit up. Like, we'd have to assume Mike entered, goes to Fazbear's Fright, and everyone dies in the fire. But I didn't write the story, we have to work with what we got. And what we got is an ending that just leaves too much story left to tell. And overall, it's just an unsatisfying conclusion of the series. How did Scott possibly think this could be an ending? Well, I think I know, and it's actually pretty simple. Sister Location was made to explain FNaF 4. When FNaF 4 came out, most people were not able to figure out that the protagonist was Mike Schmidt, so the game called out to us that our player character is named Mike, obviously Mike Schmidt. People didn't understand how the purple guy played into the story, so Scott showed us that he was the father. People didn't understand what I will put you back together meant, so he showed us this in two different ways, one by having Elizabeth be broken, and the other was Ennard. If you guys watched my video about why Dream Theory was never canon, I explained that the crying child's memories were broken across the missing children, and bringing them together sets him and them free. Ennard represents the pieces of him being put back together, which is why I think the missing children were always in the fun times. Another thing people were confused about with FNaF 4 was the year it took place, so Scott had a secret code, 1983, that showed FNaF 4 imagery. Speaking of that imagery, it was supposed to show us that no, Dream Theory wasn't canon. Every game happened for real, even a version of FNaF 4. If Scott just made this game to explain FNaF 4, then I could see how he would think it would serve as an ending. But of course, the ending itself is just unsatisfying, which is why it's in last place despite the game's quality. Before we move on to the next game, I want to talk about Sister Location's Custom Night Update. I bring this up because we don't know if the Custom Night Update was supposed to be the end of the franchise as well. This is important for a couple reasons, as it will confirm a debate happening in the community right now. You can make a compelling argument for it being the ending, and also for it not being the ending. For the Custom Night being the ending, we have the Steam post where Scott is talking about the Fazbear's Fright cutscene. For context, when the Custom Night first released, the Fazbear's Fright cutscene wasn't actually included until later, so that's what this post is about. What's important here is the end of the post. When the final cutscene is ready, I will give very hard mode a little more juice to help dedicated players make it to 6 AM. Then we will finally see what becomes of Eggs Benedict. Then our story can be complete. Smiley face. The last line, then our story can be complete, could mean the story of the franchise as a whole, but it could also mean the story of only Sister Location. Although you could argue that Sister Location's story was already done with the final 8-bit minigame, where we see what happens to Mike and Ennard, and the final cutscene is just supposed to tie everything together. Another thing that may point towards Custom Night being the original end is Sister Location's ending itself. Like I said, it feels very much like a cliffhanger. Maybe it felt like that because it was, and Scott already had the Custom Night planned to explain what was happening next and tying everything together. As for the Custom Night not being the ending, the Custom Night was announced 10 days after the game's release. This could be enough time for Scott to realize he needs to make another game, and also needs something else to set it up. Speaking of setting things up, it really does seem like the Custom Night was setting up another game. Ennard in the sewers, confirming for a fact William survived the fire, and showing it with Michael saying, "I'm gonna come find you." So what do you think? Was the Custom Night the original ending? I don't know. I go back and forth. Sure, Ennard wandering in the sewers forever is a weird ending, but so is Ennard just living in Mike's body forever, which we know was the original intention at one point. However, I have a hard time seeing Scott show Springtrap survived and then not making another game to show what happened to him next. And also, yeah, it is different from FNaF 3, because with FNaF 3, you know, that is left to interpretation if he survived or not. This would be showing for a hard fact that he survived. So I don't know, but for the sake of this video, let's just pretend someone emailed Scott and asked him if Sister Location Custom Night was ever intended to be the end of the series, and he said yes. How would I feel about it? Where would I rank it? Well, I would actually rank it at 1 or 2. The kids still get set free in FNaF 3, except for Elizabeth, because screw her, I guess. Let's just pretend she moves on too. I guess it would be best to retcon Ennard into being at Fazbear's Fright. Maybe in the box, but I don't know. Anyway, we get Mike versus William in FNaF 3, and Mike tries to kill William. And William survives. William won, right? He gets to live forever. Well, technically yes, but here's the thing. He's still kinda lost. Michael didn't kill William, sure, but he burned away his legacy, which is Fazbear's Fright, by the way. Fazbear's Fright is basically a celebration of William's crimes and stuff. So William lost his legacy and was humiliated by his very own son. As for Mike, he didn't win, he didn't get to kill William, but he still managed to burn the remnants of the legacy left by Freddy's and his father. I also think Fazbear's Fright probably represents the bite victim being put back together, so it would be cool for Mike to be there and burn it down. It could be like him being able to move on from his past. Throw in Mike regenerating too, why not, so we can get a happy ending. Or maybe Mike doesn't regenerate and him and William are both forced to live as like zombies, just wandering Hurricane for the rest of time. I think that could also be pretty neat. Overall, it's a bittersweet ending, but I do think it's kinda neat. I probably didn't do a very good job explaining why I like it, but whatever. You know, it didn't do a very good job at explaining its story? Now you might be wondering why I'm including these games together, and it's very simple. FNaF World feels like an epilogue to FNaF 4's minigame plotline. Also, I don't have a lot to say about FNaF World on its own. Now, I'm not gonna lie with you guys, it was very close between FNaF 4 and second place. And I'm not even gonna lie, I like FNaF 4 better as a story and as a conclusion. The only problem is that its story was not told very well. I just cannot in good conscience put it higher than where it is. But like I said, I do actually think this story is very satisfying as a conclusion. In case you don't know, I made a whole video going over what I think was originally going on with the story of this game, so make sure to check that out to understand my perspective. In the mini-games, we see the very start of the timeline, or at least early enough for us to learn information about this world we didn't previously know, and the gameplay shows the effects left behind by the mini-games. The whole thing I think is going on with the mini-games is that the crying child was shedding his fears, and his memories left an impact on the world around him. The gameplay, having us play as Michael years later, shows us that the impact left is still felt, with Mike obviously having strong memories of his brother, and those memories of his are used against him in his nightmares, and these memories lead into the primary motivation for our main antagonist. What I'm trying to say is that FNaF 4 explains a lot of the previous games, and gives us actual characters with motivations, and FNaF World just helps clear things up. And like I said, the only thing keeping me from putting this game higher, even at number 1, is the storytelling. It's just awful, to be honest. It's pretty clear Scott wanted us to think we were playing as the crying child, and then later realized we were playing as Mike Schmidt, who is the older brother. However, there was never hard confirmation to really make the twist work. Some things that could have made it work would be hallucinations that could randomly pop up when flashing the hallway, that are similar to hallucinations Mike can see in the hallway during FNaF 1, and something at the end of the game akin to the paychecks that we got that confirms we were playing as Mike. As for the minigame storyline, it was just too confusing, so much so that it led to people believing everything was just a dream. I think what would have really helped this section would be another minigame. How about instead of the box showing up after night 7, we make it show up after night 8 instead? And night 7 has a minigame that starts with the text 10 years after the party. We play as the crying child, now a ghost, in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He can go around and talk to the animatronics, who appear to him as children with masks on. They were all talking about stuff that kind of hints towards what was going on in the game. I'm not sure how exactly this would work, but whatever. They were also talking about the new security guard arriving that night, and at the end of the minigame, we see the new guard, and he looks just like the Foxy Bro, but without the mask and overall more grown up. We could even have him look similar to the purple guy from earlier in the minigame. Obviously, this is Mike. This would not only show the crying child's role in the story better, but more effectively set up the gameplay of the game, and show us that Foxy Bro is Mike Schmidt. Also, I would change the Fredbear plush's text color on night 6 from yellow to purple. Imagine the insane reactions there would have been if that happened. But none of this happened, unfortunately, and the actual game is very confusing. I think it's satisfying though, if only the story was told better. You know what story had good storytelling, but it's kind of just a bad story? I'm sure newcomers to my channel, and if that's you, make sure to subscribe, are surprised at where I put this game. But if you're a longtime fan of my channel, you would know I don't think this is a very satisfying ending. A far cry from the community consensus, which is that FNaF 6 is when the series should have ended. I would go into all the things I don't like about this game, but I have a video in development already about that. And I swear it is coming out, even though it's been over a year in the making. I promise you, I will get back to writing it eventually. So you'll just have to wait for that. I do have to put it above Sister Location though, as it actually has a sense of finality to it. Unlike Sister Location, where it does feel like there's more story left to tell. I guess that's what happens when you kill off all your main characters with very little build-up. And I have to put it above FNaF 4 just because, it has actual storytelling. In fact, I'd argue it was one of the peak of the early game's storytelling. You know what other game had really good storytelling for the time? And the best ending is FNaF 3, wow, what a surprise. I mean, I don't have to talk about why this is a good ending to the series at the time, right? The story is simple, and the gameplay has us going 1v1 against the purple guy, the man responsible for both our suffering and the children's as well. And we even get to help free the children, and the game ends with a fire symbolizing the end of the Freddy's legacy. Yeah, it's pretty solid, I think, but do you want to know a secret? I wouldn't actually be happy if the series ended here. Yeah, I know, hot take, but here's the thing. You see, FNaF 1 to 3 isn't really a story. I mean, it technically was, but it's really just events happening. There's no actual characters besides Phone Guy, but he is long dead. And Purple Guy, but he's a kid killer and we don't even know his motivations that well. And the kids are more of just plot devices. I think the best thing future games did was give us an actual set of characters to follow, the Aftons. That's probably why I like Sister Location Custom Night being the ending so much, assuming it was supposed to be the end at some point. Because we keep the perfect FNaF 3 ending with the added benefit of it being an actual story now. And it's better than base Sister Location's ending because it just ties everything together. Really, my whole point with this video, what I've been trying to say is, there has never been a time where FNaF should have ended. None of these endings have been that satisfactory. FNaF 3 is the closest because of what the series was at that point, but like I said, the story of 1 to 3 was more of just events happening. And to further elaborate on what I mean by that, I basically mean sure, stories are just events happening, but usually there's a narrative through line to kind of show why they're happening. With the original original series, there's no why, they just kind of happen with most of the events. There's some stuff where it's like explained why it's happening, but like the missing children incident, William going to destroy the animatronics, some of that's really like explained. It kind of just happens. That's what I'm talking about when I say it's just events happening. FNaF 4 is pretty close, but the storytelling in that game just made another one necessary. Sister Location was the complete opposite. Great storytelling, but an unsatisfying ending. And FNaF 6 had the most finality to it. But when you look at it, it's really just basically FNaF 3 again, but with a few more animatronics, worse gameplay, less build up to the ending, and a new character who basically comes out of nowhere, unless we want to count the novels that are a separate universe that we were told not to use to solve the games, who shows up after doing nothing for 30 years and kills everyone in a fire, while also not fully paying off the final cutscene from the last game that was setting up this game. But like I said, that's a video for another day. So no, FNaF shouldn't have ended at FNaF 6, 3, or 4, or I don't know, 2. FNaF should end eventually, but deserves a proper ending. And I deserve you to subscribe to my channel by hitting that red button. And make sure to comment down below what your favorite ending is, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.